Fantastic. John, let's kick it off with you. You've been in the business. We recently chatted. You've just been overseas. Can you just give us the landscape? Why is podcast such a big deal all of a sudden in South Africa?
That's a great question. How much time do we have for that one? Look, I think the global perspective that is really interesting is that we are late to the party, but our growth is massive. We're fifth in the world in terms of growth in podcasting, which is incredible. And I'll tell you one thing why there's so much interest from the global market around what's happening in South Africa is the creativity around podcasting happening across the continent is really kind of next level. And I sort of attribute it to the ingrained hustler we have in our culture, because if you're in London and America, you get a lot of like, this would be a good idea for a podcast, but here like the podcasts are edgy and people are starting them to like build careers out of them. So there's so much vibrancy in the market and it is growing so fast at the moment. Like to show you the growth on a graph in the last 6 months, you wouldn't believe from a commercial and a numbers perspective. It's incredible.
Wow, that's amazing. And from a government point of view, what is also from arts and culture that is, what does this mean for the government? And are we going to see more support like this since this is our first and our partnership?
During the COVID period, government did speak about the 4IR, in terms of where we were. And the COVID actually then pushed us as a country to make sure that we're in the spaces, we're in the digital spaces, where the content that we want for our clients or stakeholders to consume, it needed to be on platforms that they have access to on a regular basis. And of course, we, as the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, for us, we've got policies, and for us, we've got stakeholders. And as a department that is tasked with the social cohesion and nation building outcome by government, we need to make sure that whatever programs we are putting out there, our stakeholders, as well as South Africa at large, then has access to it. And the only way that they can do that is to make sure that we support programs like this. For us, it talks to what we do. As a government, we're supposed to put platforms in place so that the economy thrives, and especially for the youth, because the youth is our future.
Very true. Now, let's get more controversial. Dishaba, is podcast killing radio? Is radio dying?
Absolutely not. So just firstly, this is the first SA Podcast Music Festival, and this is the first SABC Plus brand partnership, right? And SABC Plus, as a child of SABC, being here, it's indicative of the vision that we have and where the organization is going. So a podcast and radio are two different offerings. Radio has a specific format, and podcast has a different format. So you've got more time to go in depth with certain topics or discussions or ideas, where else with radio, it's very different. Radio, you take it with, it's your friend that you go with, and it's not going to die, and podcast is just going to continue growing, right? Because, I think where the world is now with embracing diversity, we want to hear different thoughts. I was sitting with Penn when I met him, and I was like, listen, dude, I love what you do. I like the ideas that you put in. I don't agree with all of them because some of them are radical, but I like the discourse, right? And I think that's what podcast is introducing to, I'd call it mainstream, even though it's bubbling under. So the SABC, by us being here, we recognize where digital evolution or digital adoption rather is going. Definitely in 10 years' time, access to data is pretty much, I think, is going to, I don't have the exact stats, but there'll be far more access to the internet, and consumption is going to be different. So with us introducing SABC Plus and with the tagline SABC Everywhere for Everyone, it's us living up to that promise 5 years, 10 years in time. So we want to be part of the conversation. And one of the things that I know you probably won't ask for, which I want to chat to John about is syndication, right? Which is where the partnerships are between traditional broadcasters and podcasters is, how do I tap in your network, right? And how do you, from a marketing point of view, can I discuss with you as a marketer the network of podcasters that you have so I can advertise and grow a loyal base before I go mass? So, do you have, John, do you have a catalog for me to say, if you want to reach and speak to a small audience that is, focused on thought leadership, or one that is focused on dance, and can I speak to them before I introduce the dance show that I'm coming up with? So I think there's just a lot of collaboration that will exist, with podcasting.
Great. I want to bring in Les here as well. Thank you, Dishaba, for that point. From a culture, content, creators, music point of view, Leslie, you've been in the business. You've seen a lot of media evolve. What do you think the opportunity exists for creators, especially content creators and musicians in the space?
Thank you for that question, Fundo. I'm a little uncomfortable. I feel like I will never make a good backing vocalist. Can I please speak like this? Fundo, just to answer your question, I think, and I also want to echo what John said earlier on about the uptake, the numbers, and all of that, as well as taking from that incredible presentation by Tebe Kalafin. I thought it was extremely informative and important and necessary. I think what is happening is we see Africans waking up to their greatness. Podcast, when you think about it, is really oral traditions that we grew up on. Our grandparents, our parents, ourselves, some of us were old enough, we used to huddle around the radio set and listen to a radio drama or listen to radio. That was our podcast of that time.
True.
And I think what we're seeing right now is just Africans tapping into their greatness and enjoying listening to stories. I don't know if it's a good thing for someone like me who is of the written word. I don't know what that means for us, people who write books and write newspapers and write articles, that kind of thing. Because now we've gone back to listening to the voice, being engaged with the voice, and being enthralled by this action or drama that we're hearing from the presentation. Because as podcasts obviously are different and there's different offerings. I come from the music space as the recording industry of South Africa. We have a product that is called the Official South African Charts. And we've just launched our own podcast because we realize the power of podcast, the power of taking the message to not only a new audience, but also translating the storytelling that comes with music. So there's a whole lot of layers, a whole lot of stuff to get into when you talk about podcasting and music and storytelling and the culture as South Africans. But what I'm going to say is that for me, it really is about Africa going back to what it does best, which is our oral traditions.
Fantastic. Now, if somebody's here, they want to learn about podcasting, they want to start their own podcast, they want to know how to make money out of it, how to stand out from the clutter, because there's many podcasts, like we've mentioned. John, what would you give advice to, especially on the monetization?
Okay, so let me just take a step back. So I did my first podcast in 2009, the official South African podcast. It was called the Official South African Music Industry Podcast. And this industry has been bubbling under for a long, long time. And one of the things that has also showed what is happening in the space in terms of opportunity is that we started AMP Studios, which is a free culture house in downtown Joburg. And when we started it in 2017-18, it was to support the music industry. So it has world-class recording studios in all these rooms, and it's free for everybody. But over 3 years, there's almost no, after about 3 years, there's almost no music in there. It's now a full-fledged podcasting empowerment hub. And the amount of people that are doing podcasting in this space is really amazing. And so why we built AMPed was because, to answer your question, is how do you get started? Now, yes, anyone can start a podcast from their phone, But with Amped now, which is a free resource for creators, there's podcasting studios, there are masterclasses about starting podcasts, there's cameras, there's a team of people there that can facilitate. And what has happened at Amped is there's a whole community of podcasters. And as sort of going to the previous talk, one of the South Africanisms we have is I see that it hurts industry is we work in silos, not in communities. And
True.
even though we speak about working a community, everybody prefers to work in the silo. And with Amped, we've managed to break some boundaries because you see Spoo there, you see all the different people. And I think this is the thing about podcasting is that if you want to get started, yes, you can start in your room by yourself, but you need to be with people. You need support. You need other podcasters in your environment because this industry is turning into a real industry in front of us. So let's talk about monetization. So the monetization part is very exciting. And why we started the Africa Podcast Network is for this reason. We saw that there were lots of podcasters who were doing really amazing work. I started working with MacG in the early days, right up to a few months ago. We took him right past 1 million. And now we're working in APN with podcasters like Mpumile Dwaba, Busi Tembakwayo, many, many more. And the reason we looked at them is that there are podcasters who are just focusing on audience growth, who are doing such great content that people really need, and they're growing, but there's been a problem in the monetization, and the problem in the monetization is scalability. And one podcast is not enough to actually unlock brand budgets. So what we've done at APN is we've created a network, an open network for podcasters to come work with us. And to your question, we're completely focused on the analytics of all the individual audiences, and that's what brands are really interested in. And in the last 4 or 5 months, we're doing really big business, and it's making money for a lot of different podcasters, even niche podcasters. So in podcasting, sorry to just ramble on, it doesn't make, you need to be big, you need to have a niche. So if you are very specific in an area, that's a valuable audience. There are some podcasters that have big audiences, but niche audiences are valuable too.
So the key word there is you need to be niche. You need to identify your audience and obviously your content. Now let's bring in advertisers. Is government ready to spend money advertising on podcasts? I'll leave it first.
Government is always willing to spend money. But unfortunately, sometimes we have to look at what the content of the podcaster is all about. Because remember, at the end of the day, as a business, you want to go where your brand is not going to be bastardized in any way. So that is why it's important for podcasters when they create their content. And I know it's very difficult for the youth. They like to use the swearing words. They like to use funny things. They like to be naked. Brands look at that. And it is important for me. I'm a government. We are a government department. And of course, we can't go to a platform where people are using your, swearing words and F words and all of that. And that is a problem that our youth don't understand. Because you look at what they are saying, you look at what they are doing, and what they are doing and saying must resonate with the brand that you are. And if it does resonate with your brand, definitely, I promise you, you will spend money on it. And let me tell you just one more thing that government is doing, for example. You know that there are community radio stations. You've got your Jozi FMs, your Tembisa, all of these little small community radio stations. As government, all the government departments are actually given a mandate to say, let us support the community radio stations because they are smaller, unlike the commercial. Of course, we're not moving away from the commercial stations. But then government does give a mandate to say that in whatever you do in terms of your advertising budget, put aside a certain percentage that you're going to spend on community radio stations. So now that the podcasting digital platform is now with us, again, we are on those platforms. For example, if you go to any government department, it's on TikTok, it's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, it's on we on all these digital platforms. And of course, we do want to use influencers. We do want to use podcasters. But again, what you put out there determines whether you're going to get the support of government. And just to bring it in a little bit,
There's a round of applause there.
just to bring it a little bit, I've got my son, who's a podcaster. And sometimes when I go to his pages, and I try to teach him to say, but if you have this content on your page, you are definitely not going to get my business as government. And that is the reality. And I think the youth, fortunately, John mentioned something that you must have a niche market. You must have different messages for different people. And if you have that niche, we know you still want to go to be with it and use the language that your peers are using. But sometimes clean podcasting is a thing, and we believe in it.
Thank you for that point. Thank you for that point from the
Do you mind if I
government.
just add one thing there? It's not only government that have those issues. Brand safety is a really important thing. If you are, if you just want to be a podcaster for fame, then go do that. But if you want to be a commercial podcaster, understanding brand safety, and that doesn't mean you have to be not edgy, doesn't mean you have to be not out there on a limb. It doesn't even mean that you don't have to swear necessarily, but understanding brand safety, that the brand's hesitation of being in the podcasting space is because their reputation is on the line. So the better you conduct yourself as a podcaster in terms of your content, the quality, and how you approach it, the better. And there are great podcasters with big numbers. They don't have the brand safety, so they're not able to do the business.
But John, somebody can argue that with the podcasts we've seen a lot of advertising product placements, especially alcohol companies. We've seen sneaker brands. So in other words, there are brands that are willing to risk it in that space. And I want to bring in the marketer as well, is those brands that sees this audience, sees this very unconventional media platform, however, feel bold enough to be part of it. What kind of marketers are that versus the ones who are playing it safe?
So I think the big thing in marketing now, and I'll speak from my perspective, is not the reach, but it's the engagement. So the tribe and the niche is very important, right? So, which is why the approach now is to start from the inside small, then go big, right? So where do you find this inside small? Whilst a lot of marketers are busy with influencers and looking at the reach, I'm looking for, give me 100 people that are truly convicted in the ideals that can tap into my brand proposition. And then together, let's build this movement for my brand, right? And I think that's a more sustainable way of building brands. And a lot of companies are starting to do that. So whilst, you can find a maverick that probably does swear, maybe does have dancing girls, and, you can have a discussion and say, listen, man, at your core of your offering, it's aligned to my brand, but some things are not safe, brand safe, to your point. But others, you'll just, stay away from. So whilst it gives you freedom of thought, you just need to be mindful of the entire ecosystem. But if, some people might be scared of Penn, for example, right, because of how thought-provoking he is. But it's that maverick of, breaking the mold and breaking the status quo that a brand can fall in love with. So I think every podcaster needs to have a high level of professionalism, and they need to be very intentional about the brand and the offering they're putting out there, knowing that it's not just the listeners, but it's possibly other partners. It's also possibly other brands that they might get involved with.
Great. We've got about...
For me, Mfunda, just one more thing. It's important sometimes to take risks on things, which for me, it was no-brainer when Nicholas approached me about this podcast. And I wanted to be the first to be part of it, because you can see when something is good. And as a result, you can actually say, when it becomes greater, you can say, we come from far with this brand. And also, I just wanted to mention what John was talking about in terms of brand safety. It is not only about edginess. There are products that, even though it's a good product, you know that it is, But when you look at it, you know that you cannot partner with it. For an example, as government, sometimes we get approached by alcohol houses who want to partner with us. Then as government, we have to think and say, what is it that we want to communicate to the society out there? What are the problems that are there with alcohol in our society as well as youth? Do we want to be part of that partnership? So when you are looking at partnering with someone, there are many other things that you have to look at. And also at the end of the day, you must look at what it's going to do to your brand.
Thank you so much. Just one thought there, John. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the floor. I know we've got Arena Holdings. I saw Rams. They also do podcasting. We've got other colleagues. So if anybody has a question for the panel, we've got... Okay, first question.
Hi, my name is Tamim Bong. I just want to ask from the department, is there any podcast in South Africa that the DSEC is funding currently? Because I'm hearing that you are saying you can't fund, because in my knowledge of Department of Sports and Culture, I've never heard of the department funding any podcast in the country. Can you give us a clarity on that? Thanks.
Thank you. Good question. This is the best.
You want me to respond or?
Yes, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. We are not funding any podcaster right now. My response was, if we were to advertise or if we were to fund, we look at what your content is all about. But we do have our entities as Department of Sport, Arts and Culture that fund podcasters. For an example, we've got the National Arts Council. What people do not know is that the National Arts Council gets money from the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture because it's our entity. We also have the NFVF, which is the National Film Video and Video Foundation, that funds filmmakers. So the department sometimes does not directly fund things. We give them to our entities because as a department, we've got funding entities that they do that on our behalf. But other than that, Tina, we have not funded any podcaster, but all I was saying is that if you want me to advertise, because at the end of the day, the most important thing that you want as a podcaster is an advertiser.
I'm sorry, that's misleading. I personally have been funded both by National Arts Council and National Film Video Foundation. In their criteria, they don't fund our podcasts. Let's please not mislead each other here. Thanks.
That was not my intention to mislead you, but I was not saying that they fund podcasters, but I said they do the funding on behalf of the department. Tina, we don't give them what criteria they need to use to fund, but Tina, we give them the money, and they know what it is that they want to achieve. So if they don't fund podcasting, that is something that maybe they would have to consider, and maybe they then put that as part of their criteria. But the message that I wanted to put across is that the funding that the department will do, it will then come through our entities, which are funding entities, and that's the National Art Council, that's the National Heritage Council, that's the NFVF, and many others.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next question, please.
Thank you to the panel very much. I wanted to know, it's two questions. First one is basically, at what level, and they're quite linked, at what level podcast can you approach brands for sponsorship? And kind of linked to that is, what are some of the key metrics, the key performance indicators that you'll look to have before approaching them?
That's such a great question. Can I take that one?
Johnny, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. That's such a fantastic question. And the reason is, I think the most important thing to understand is that a lot of brands are confused about podcasting. And it isn't an influencer play, even though that is part of it. Like, concept is not interesting to a brand. What is interesting to a brand is your audience. Your audience is everything. These brands that are not scared to be on really edgy podcasts is because they are trying to reach the audience that you have. So there are a couple of answers to your questions. You can start at really early. So when I started my first podcast, I did a $3,000 a month deal with a brand partner that I said to them, look, I want to build this thing. It's in your audience. We can work on it together. I don't have an audience, so invest in me. I'll give you this ridiculous deal for 6 months so that we can build it. It's really hard. And the answer to your question, the metric is all in your audience. Who they are, how many of them is important, but who they are is more important. And what is your relationship with them? In other words, are they coming back each week? The power of podcasting is in your audience. Unlike any social media, you can never lose your podcasting audience. It always grows, and the better quality audience, the more brands are coming to you. So you can start really early, but to actually monetize and start running ads on your podcast, except for with micro brands that want to help you get off the starting blocks, I think you can start as low as 1,000 per episode, but that's quite high. If you're in podcasting, you know that first 1,000 is high, but once you are there, you're on the machine, and you can start monetizing, and it's small monetization to begin with. And there's 2 different routes to monetization. There are ads that we can place on your podcast programmatically, meaning they just get inserted into your podcast and you get paid for it, kind of like a YouTube pre-roll. But the second one is in your personal brand partnerships. And so you can start right at the beginning if you're really smart, but it is that 0 to 1,000 part that is the hardest for podcasters.
Thank you.
Unless you're in a very specific niche. Because if you're in a brilliant niche like extreme fly fishing, and you only have 500 followers, remember the people who are selling extreme fly fishing rods for 20,000 Rand a rod, they don't have access to that audience. You are the conduit to that audience. And I think one of the issues is if you're going for mass audience in podcasting, you're going to really struggle. There's so much competition. Rather get a great niche audience than a wide audience.
Thank
What
you
I
so
wanted to add, just to that, right? So you also don't have to go through it alone. And John speaks about the concept of community. So if you have like 5 podcasters and you guys are buds, and you guys know collectively you speak to this audience, you can collectively make an offer to media agencies and say, hey, we are, group a trio of podcasters. We have this audience. Collectively, they make up this, but they give you access to 1, 2, 3. Or you can even join Amped. So sometimes if you try and do it alone, you might not necessarily have...
So I just want to quickly, say, the Africa Podcast Network that we've created is designed exactly for this. And something that, just going back to the IP of artists, we are a unique business because we don't want any of your IP. You own your podcast completely. We're just focusing on the monetization at scale to help as many podcasters as possible make income from their podcast. It's very hard to do by yourself.
Well, the good news is that SABC is here. They are a partner for the next 2 days, so you'll be able to engage them. AMP Studios is here. You'll be able to engage them. Arts and Culture is here. You'll be able to engage them. RISA is here. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
So sorry, before you close, I have to say this. So the synergies between industries are very clear, right? So, for example, Meg G and Soul are going to do a show on SABC2, right? And I think I need to say and share that people think of podcast in isolation of other industries. There's partnerships. And I know,
Licensing is a big deal.
It's a big deal. Now, no, Meg G, he says a lot of stuff about us, but we're doing business together. So there's other opportunities that are involved in you doing podcasts and so on. So it's not just the podcast. It just opens up other stuff.
So they can pitch it to you during the conference.
Yeah, licensing also is a big deal, which is
deal.
something I want to speak to you about because you spoke about a documentary about the impact of South Africans on the global market.
Oh, yeah.
Please, can we speak about that?
Can I just say one last thing? I know I just want you to hear this. We've just been briefed for the first time ever for a massive international and South African podcast collab. And just so you know, the rest of the world is looking here for podcasters. Sorry, I just wanted to puke that out.
Okay, we're done. Literally, I'm out of time, but I'm going to give our sponsor just the closing words.
Thank you very much, Mfundo. One of the things that I would like to advise the youth is that, for example, how you package your pitch to us as a department is important. For an example, we've got what we call the Mzansi Golden Economy. And every now and again, the department calls for proposals. where we want to fund people for projects that they want to do. So it might not be that we are funding podcast, but how you then package what you want to do. Because we don't tell you how to do whatever the idea that the department funds you for. We don't tell you whether it should be a podcast, whether it should be a festival, whether it should be whatever. But I think our youth sometimes, they don't want to be creative enough. Most of them, they will come to the department wanting us to fund them for festivals. I think it's time for you to be creative and think outside of the box and say, I have a podcast, but I want to have a festival. How do I package this to the department so that the department can then fund me? So for me, all I'm asking the youth to do is please do think out of the box, and how you package what you want makes a great deal.
Thank you so much. Give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much.